The docking bay of Kepler Station reeked of fuel vapors and desperation. Captain Jake Morrison shouldered his way through the crowd of dock workers and smugglers, his weathered face set in the same neutral expression he'd worn since mustering out of the Colonial Marines 3 years ago. The titanium plates in his left leg clicked softly with each step, a souvenir from the siege of New Carthage that had ended his military career and started his new life hauling cargo across the outer rim. Captain Morrison? A crisp voice cut through the industrial noise. Jake turned to see a woman in the stark gray uniform of the Galactic Security Council approaching. Her badge identified her as Agent Patricia Reeves, and her pale blue eyes held the kind of cold calculation that made Jake's old war wounds ache. "That's me," Jake replied, his tone carefully neutral. "You the one with my cargo manifest?" Agent Reeves handed him a sealed data pad. "This is a priority alpha transport. No questions, no deviations from the flight plan, no communications blackouts. Longer than standard protocol allows." Jake's eyebrows rose as he scanned the manifest. The destination was Titan Base, a maximum security facility that most spacers only whispered about. But it was the cargo description that made him pause. Classified biological asset. Extreme caution required. "Biohazard?" Jake asked, though something in Reeves's expression suggested it wasn't that simple. "Classified," she repeated. "Your, ship has been equipped with a specialized containment unit. The asset will remain secured for the duration of transport. Under no circumstances are you to interact with or examine the cargo." The pay authorization made Jake whistle softly, enough to keep his ship running for 6 months. Whatever they wanted transported, the council was paying premium rates for it. 20 minutes later, Jake watched as a heavily armed security team wheeled a sleek, chrome containment pod up his ship's cargo ramp. The pod was roughly human-sized, with a small viewport that had been deliberately obscured. Warning labels in a dozen languages covered its surface, but Jake noticed something odd. Alongside the standard biohazard symbols were others he didn't recognize, symbols that looked almost protective. As the security team departed, Jake caught a glimpse of movement through a gap in the viewport's covering. Something small and pale shifted inside the containment unit. "Jesus," he muttered. "They're shipping a person." The realization settled in his stomach like a cold stone. Jake had hauled weapons, illegal tech, even black market organs in his years as an independent freight captain, but he'd never transported a person, especially not one locked in what amounted to a high-tech prison cell. His ship, the Wandering Star, lifted off from Kepler Station without incident. As they cleared the station's gravity well and entered hyperspace, Jake tried to focus on routine maintenance tasks, but his mind kept drifting to the cargo hold. On the second day, Jake's curiosity finally overcame his better judgment. He made his way to the cargo hold, telling himself he was just conducting a standard safety inspection. The containment pod sat in the center of the hold, its surface reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Jake approached the viewport carefully, peeling back a corner of the obscuring material. What he saw made him take an involuntary step backward. Girl, she couldn't be more than 12 or 13, sat curled in the pod's corner. Her skin was pale as moonlight and her hair was white as fresh snow. But it was her eyes that stopped Jake cold. They glowed with a soft amber light, like twin stars in the darkness of the pod. She looked up at him with those impossible eyes, and Jake saw something that Agent Reeves's briefing had never mentioned. Intelligence, awareness, and underneath it all, a deep, aching loneliness that reminded him of his own reflection in the mirror some mornings. The girl didn't move or make any sound, but Jake noticed her head tilt slightly as the ship's music system played softly in the background. An old Earth blues song he'd been listening to while working on repairs. "What the hell did they do to you, kid?" Jake whispered, as if she'd heard. Him through the pod's soundproofing, the girl's glowing eyes met his. For just a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw her lips move, forming a single silent word: help. Jake stepped back from the viewport, his heart hammering. Whatever this girl was, weapon, experiment, or something else entirely, she was far from the emotionless biohazard the council had described. And Jake Morrison, former Colonial Marine and current freight hauler, was beginning to realize he was in way over his head. The wandering star continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying its unlikely passengers toward an uncertain fate. In the cargo hold, Amber eyes watched the stars wheel past through a tiny gap in the viewport covering, while in the cockpit, a scarred veteran wrestled with a decision that would change both their lives forever. The hum of the wandering star's engines provided a steady backdrop as Jake found himself returning to the cargo hold more frequently than any legitimate maintenance schedule required. Each time he told himself he was just checking the environmental systems or monitoring power consumption. Each time he found himself drawn to that small viewport and the girl with the glowing amber eyes. She never moved when she saw him, just watched with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. But it wasn't the predatory stillness of a weapon waiting to strike. It was something else entirely, something that reminded him of the stray dogs he'd fed as a kid on Mars Colony. Wary, but desperately hoping for kindness. On the morning of the second day, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been running diagnostics on the ship's audio system when he noticed an anomaly in the cargo hold's acoustic sensors. The readings showed microscopic vibrations in the containment pod, so faint they barely registered on the equipment. Curious, Jake isolated the frequency and amplified it through his headphones. Music. The girl was humming. It was barely audible, more of a whispered melody than actual singing, but Jake recognized the tune. It was the same blues song that had been playing yesterday when he'd first seen her face. She'd somehow memorized it after hearing it just once through the pod's supposedly soundproof walls. Jake stared at the readout, his coffee growing cold, in his hands. Weapons didn't hum lullabies. Bioengineered killing machines didn't memorize music after a single hearing and then sing it to themselves in the dark. That afternoon, Jake made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed during his military days. He activated the pod's external communication system, a feature he wasn't supposed to know existed, but 3 decades of tinkering with military hardware had taught him a few tricks. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly, speaking into the comm. "Pick up." The humming stopped immediately. Through the viewport, Jake saw the girl's head turn toward the speaker, her luminous eyes wide with surprise. "I'm Jake," he continued, feeling somewhat ridiculous for introducing himself to a containment pod. "Jake Morrison. I'm the captain of this ship." Silence stretched between them for nearly a minute. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, came a response. "Echo," she whispered. Her voice was like wind through autumn leaves, soft, hesitant, barely there. "Echo? Is that your name?" A pause. They called me Subject 47, but I heard someone say Echo once. I liked the sound." Jake felt something twist in his chest. She'd given herself a name. Weapons didn't choose their own names. Over the following hours, their conversations became longer, though Echo remained cautious. She spoke in whispered fragments, as if afraid someone might overhear. Jake learned that she'd been awake in the containment pod since leaving Kepler Station, listening to every sound the ship made. She could identify different types of engines by their vibration patterns, had memorized the ship's daily routine schedules, and knew exactly how many steps it took Jake to walk from the cockpit to the cargo hold. 47 steps, she said, when he asked. But on your left leg, you favor the right side by approximately 2 inches each step. Old injury? Jake unconsciously rubbed his titanium-plated thigh. Battle wound, how did you... Never mind. That's quite an eye for detail. They made me to notice everything, Echo said, and for the first time Jake heard something like sadness in her voice. Every weakness, every tactical advantage, every way to hurt people efficiently. Is that what you want to do? Hurt people? The question hung in the recycled air of the cargo hold for a long moment. No, Echo finally whispered. I just want to see the stars without walls between us. That night, Jake found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about Echo's words, about the way she'd hummed that blues song, about the longing in her voice when she spoke about the stars. When sleep finally came, he dreamed of amber eyes and whispered songs. He woke to the shrill alarm of his proximity sensors. Unknown vessels approaching. This is your final warning. The transmission crackled with static and barely contained violence. Pirates. Jake cursed as he threw himself into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. 3 ships, fast attack craft by the look of them, were closing on his position. The Wandering Star was a freight hauler, not a warship. She had minimal shields and exactly 1 defensive weapon that Jake hadn't fired in anger since leaving the Marines. "This is Captain Morrison of the merchant vessel Wandering Star," he broadcast. "I'm carrying classified cargo under Galactic Security Council protection. You really don't want to do this." The lead pirate's response was a plasma torpedo that barely missed his starboard engine. As Jake fought to keep his ship intact, the cargo hold's proximity alarms began screaming. He glanced at his security monitors and felt his blood turn to ice. The containment pod's locks were cycling through their release sequence. "Echo, no," he shouted into the comm. "Stay in the pod." But it was too late. The containment unit hissed open and through his security cameras. Jake watched as Echo stepped into the cargo hold for the first time in days. She moved with inhuman grace, her bare feet silent on the metal deck plating. The pirates had breached the hull. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but Jake knew he'd remember every detail for the rest of his life. Echo moved through the boarding party like death itself, not with the cold efficiency of a machine, but with desperate protective fury. She wasn't fighting to kill, she was fighting to protect. When the last pirate fell, Echo collapsed against the cargo hold wall, her small frame shaking with something that looked remarkably like shock. Jake found her there 10 minutes later, amber eyes wide and fixed on nothing, her lips moving in what might have been an apology. "Hey," Jake said softly, kneeling beside her. "You okay, kid?" Echo looked up at him, and Jake saw tears tracking down her pale cheeks, impossible glowing tears that caught the light like liquid starfire. "I didn't want to hurt them," she whispered, "but they were going to hurt you." Jake Morrison, veteran of 3 colonial wars and 20 years of hauling cargo through the galaxy's most dangerous sectors, felt his heart break for a genetically engineered weapon who cried over the violence she'd been created to commit. "I know," he said, and meant it. "I know, Echo. You did good." As he helped her back to the containment pod, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives. He wasn't delivering a weapon to Titan Base. He was delivering a child who deserved better than the fate waiting for her. The final day of their journey to Titan Base found Jake Morrison staring at a star chart that might as well have been a map to hell. Every route to their destination passed through council-monitored space. Every port of call was logged and tracked, and every deviation from their flight plan would trigger an automatic investigation. In the cargo hold, Echo sat in her reopened containment pod, though Jake had disabled the locking mechanisms 2 days ago. She chose to stay inside, she'd explained, because it felt safer than the vast emptiness of the ship's corridors. But now she sat with the pod door open, her legs dangling over the edge like any normal child might sit on a dock beside a lake. "Jake?" Her voice drifted through the ship's comm system. She'd figured out how to access the internal channels, another impossible feat that Jake had stopped questioning. "Yeah, kid? What happens when we reach Titan Base?" Jake's hands stilled on the navigation console. It was the question he'd been dreading, the one that had kept him awake for the past 3 nights. He'd done his research on Titan Base, calling in favors with old military contacts and digging through classified databases he technically wasn't supposed to access anymore. What he'd found had made him physically sick. "Jake?" Echo's voice was smaller now, tinged with the kind of fear that no child should ever have to feel. "I'm here, Echo. I'm just thinking." Jake pulled up the files he'd compiled on Titan Base's research division. Project names like Enhanced Combat Response Conditioning and Tactical Memory Implantation filled the screen. Test subject mortality rates that made his combat veteran's stomach turn. And at the bottom of it all, a requisition order for Subject 47. That detailed exactly what they planned to do to Echo. They were going to strip away everything that made her human. "The people at Titan Base," Jake said carefully. They think you're just a weapon. They don't understand that you're more than what you were made to be. But I am a weapon, Echo replied with heartbreaking matter-of-factness. I was created to fight and kill. The scientists who made me, they removed the parts of my brain that would make me hesitate or feel regret. Except what? Except I do feel things. When you play music, I feel peaceful. When you laugh at something on the entertainment feeds, I feel happy that you're happy. When those pirates tried to hurt you, I felt scared, not for me, for you. Jake closed his eyes, remembering his military psychologist's explanation of what made soldiers effective killers versus what made them human beings. Echo should have been the perfect weapon, all the physical capabilities with none of the emotional constraints. Instead, she was proof that humanity couldn't be engineered away. Jake, I have a question. Shoot. What's a father? The question hit Jake like a plasma blast to the chest. What? Where did you hear that word? In the entertainment files. There are stories about fathers who protect their children, who teach them things, who care about them even when they make mistakes. Is that real? Jake found himself thinking about his own father, a gruff mining engineer who'd taught him to fix engines and to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. A man who'd hugged Jake goodbye when he shipped out to the colonial wars and who'd been waiting at the spaceport when Jake came home broken and scarred. Yeah, kid. That's real. I think I would like to have a father. The words hung in the ship's recycled air like a challenge to everything Jake had ever believed about duty, orders, and the line between right and wrong. He looked at the navigation display showing their approach to Titan Base, then at the dossier detailing what would happen to Echo once they arrived. Finally, he looked at the ship's emergency protocols, the ones that would let him fake a critical system failure and divert to the nearest safe harbor. Jake Morrison had followed orders his entire adult life. He'd shipped out when the Corps told him to ship out, fought when they told him to fight, and killed when they told him to kill. When they'd medically discharged him, he'd followed their orders then too, kept his mouth shut about classified operations, took his pension, and found a quiet life hauling cargo. But some orders were wrong. Some orders were evil. Echo? Yes. Jake? How do you feel about taking a little detour? Jake's fingers flew over the navigation console as he uploaded a new flight plan. The Wandering Star shuddered as her engines changed course, angling away from Titan Base toward the abandoned mining stations of the Kepler Belt. Jake? Echo's voice was wondering, almost afraid to hope. Are you choosing me over your orders? Kid? Jake said, his voice rough with emotions he hadn't felt in years. I'm choosing right over wrong. Sometimes that's the same thing. As the ship jumped to hyperspace on their unauthorized course, Jake Morrison crossed a line he could never uncross. In the cargo hold, a girl with glowing amber eyes smiled for the first time in her short, violent life. But their freedom would be measured in hours, not days. The Galactic Security Council didn't lose track of priority Alpha cargo, and Jake knew that somewhere behind them pursuit ships were already warming their engines. The choice was made. Now came the consequences. The abandoned mining station designated Kepler 47 had been dead for 15 years. Its automated systems long since failed, and its corridors dark as the space between stars. It was exactly the kind of place Jake Morrison had hoped to avoid for the rest of his life. Too much like the derelict stations he'd cleared during the war, too full of shadows and memories. But it was also off the shipping lanes and hopefully beneath the Council's immediate attention. A place where he and Echo could catch their breath and figure out their next move. It's so quiet, Echo whispered as they made their way through the station's main corridor, their footsteps echoing in the artificial gravity Jake had managed to restore. She walked close beside him, her luminous eyes providing the only light. In the abandoned facility, most places are when people aren't around to make noise, Jake replied, checking his scanner for any signs of life or functional systems. You've spent your whole life around machines and people, haven't you? Yes. First the laboratory, then the research ships, then the containment pod. I've never been somewhere so... She paused, searching for the word. Empty. Jake found them. A relatively intact observation deck overlooking the mining station's main chamber. Through the reinforced windows, the Kepler belt stretched out in all directions, a river of asteroids and debris lit by the distant glow of the system's star. "It's beautiful," Echo breathed, pressing her face against the cool glass. "Yeah," Jake agreed, though he was watching her reflection in the window rather than the view outside. "Echo, we need to talk about what happens next." She turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting his own worry. "They're coming for us, aren't they?" Jake nodded. "Council ships are probably already triangulating our position based on our hyperspace signature. We've got maybe 6 hours before they track us down. Then we should run again." "Where?" Jake asked gently. "The Wandering Star is a freight hauler, not a warship. She's fast enough for normal cargo runs, but not fast enough to outrun military pursuit craft indefinitely, and I'm just one man, Echo. I can't fight the entire Galactic Security Council." Echo was quiet for a long moment, her small hands pressed against the observation window. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You could leave me. Here, take your ship and go. Tell them I escaped during a system malfunction." The suggestion hit Jake like a physical blow. "Echo, I've read the files on Titan Base," she continued, her tone becoming matter-of-fact in the way that broke Jake's heart. "I know what they want to do to me, but I also know what they'll do to you for helping me. Court-martial, imprisonment, maybe worse. You don't deserve that." Jake knelt down so he could look Echo in the eyes, those impossible glowing eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone so young. "Listen to me, kid. I've made a lot of choices in my life, some good and some I'm not proud of, but choosing to help you? That's the first thing I've done in years that I know is absolutely right. I'm not leaving you. But no buts. We're in this together now." Echo stared at him for a moment, then threw her arms around his neck in an embrace that was fierce and desperate and entirely human. Jake held her close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like armor he'd thought he'd never wear again. That was when the proximity alarm started screaming. Through the observation deck's windows, Jake could see them coming. 3. Council interceptors dropping out of hyperspace with the precise coordination of a military strike team. Their running lights cut through the darkness like predatory eyes. "This is Commander Elena Voss of the GSC Retribution," a crisp voice crackled through the station's emergency communication system. "Captain Morrison, you are in violation of multiple interstellar statutes. Surrender the asset immediately and prepare to be boarded." Jake activated the comm panel with hands that were steadier than he felt. "Commander Voss, this is Jake Morrison. The asset you're looking for is a 12-year-old girl, not a weapon. She doesn't belong in your laboratories. Captain Morrison, you are not qualified to make that determination. You have 60 seconds to surrender before we board by force." Jake looked at Echo, who had gone very still beside him. Her amber eyes were fixed on the approaching ships, and Jake could see her calculating angles, distances, tactical options. The weapon the Vorth Empire had created was analyzing the threat, but underneath that cold assessment, Jake could see the frightened child she truly was. "Echo," he said softly, "whatever happens, I want you to know that these past few days, having you aboard my ship, talking with you, watching you discover music and stars and what it means to choose, it's been an honor." She looked up at him with eyes that were suddenly bright with tears. "Jake, are you—" The first boarding pod slammed into the station's docking bay with enough force to shake the entire structure. "Stay here," Jake ordered, grabbing his service pistol from his belt. "Stay hidden, and whatever you do, don't fight to protect you." Echo's voice had changed, becoming something colder and more dangerous. "Don't use the abilities they gave me to keep safe the first person who ever treated me like a human being." The second boarding pod hit the station, and Jake could hear the hiss of cutting torches beginning to work on the airlock seals. "Echo, please. If you fight them, you prove they're right about what you are. And if I don't fight them, they take you away and turn me into exactly what they want me to be anyway." The airlock exploded inward, and Council security forces poured into the station with military precision. Jake could see their helmet lights dancing through the corridors below, could hear their coordinated movements as they swept the facility room by room. Echo stepped away from the observation window, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the emotionless calculation of a bioweapon. It was the desperate fury of a child protecting the only family she'd ever known. Echo, no. But she was already moving, her small form disappearing into the shadows of the abandoned station, like death itself given purpose. The sounds of battle echoed through Kepler 47's empty corridors, the sharp crack of plasma weapons, the heavy thud of bodies hitting metal floors, and underneath it all, the sound of Jake Morrison's heart breaking as he realized that sometimes love meant fighting, even when fighting proved your enemies right. When the silence finally came, Jake found Echo in the station's main hub, surrounded by unconscious council troops. She sat against a bulkhead with her knees drawn up to her chest, amber tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "I tried not to kill them," she whispered. "I tried to just stop them, but they were going to hurt you. And I couldn't let them." Commander Voss appeared in the doorway, her weapon trained on Echo but her eyes fixed on the carnage around them. She was older than her voice had suggested, with gray-streaked hair and scars that spoke of long experience with violence. 13 trained security operatives," Voss said quietly. "Taken down by one small girl without a single fatality. That's either remarkable restraint or terrifying precision." "It's love," Jake said, stepping protectively in front of Echo. She was protecting someone she cares about. "That's not what weapons do, Commander. That's what family does." Voss studied them both for a long moment, her weapon never wavering. Then, to Jake's surprise, she slowly lowered her pistol. "Captain Morrison," she said, "you've created quite a problem for the Council. Subject 47 was supposed to be a simple transport job. Instead, we have 13 injured operatives, an unauthorized course deviation, and a bioweapon that apparently thinks it's your daughter." "She doesn't think it," Jake replied firmly. "She is." Commander Voss looked at Echo, who had raised her head to meet the older woman's gaze with defiant amber eyes. "Tell me, Subject 47, Voss said. "If I ordered you to come with me right now, what would you do?" Echo's voice was steady despite her tears. "I would ask you to please not hurt Jake, and then I would refuse. And if I threatened Captain Morrison to force your compliance, then I would stop you." The words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Voss nodded slowly. "I see." She activated her comm unit. "All units, this is Commander Voss. Stand down and return to ships. We have a situation that requires alternative handling." As the sound of retreating footsteps echoed through the station, Jake helped Echo to her feet. She leaned against him, exhausted by the fight and the emotions it had unleashed. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Commander Voss looked out at the asteroid field beyond the station's windows, then back at the unlikely pair before her. "Now, Captain Morrison, you're going to disappear. Both of you. There are places in the outer rim where the Council's reach is limited. Frontier worlds that need good people and don't ask too many questions about where they came from." She handed Jake a data chip. "New identities, ship registration, and enough credits to start over. Consider it a gift from someone who remembers what it was like to believe in right and wrong." "Why?" Jake asked. Voss smiled, the first genuine expression Jake had seen from her. "Because 30 years ago I was a scared kid on a battlefield, and a gruff old sergeant chose to see me as a person worth saving instead of just another casualty of war. Sometimes the best orders are the ones we give ourselves." As the Council ships departed, Jake and Echo stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel past the station's windows. "Jake?" Echo asked softly. "Yeah, kid. What do fathers teach their daughters?" Jake put his arm around her shoulders, feeling the weight of the future settling around them like a protective cloak. "Everything," he said. "We teach them everything." 6 months later, the morning sun of Haven's world painted the small frontier town of Cedar Falls in shades of gold and amber that reminded Jake Morrison of his daughter's eyes. He stood on the porch of their modest house, the first real home he'd had since leaving the military, and watched Echo chase fireflies in the tall grass beyond their garden. She'd grown in the months since Kepler 47, not just physically but in ways that mattered more. The haunted look had faded from her amber eyes, replaced by the natural curiosity of a child discovering a world that held wonders instead of weapons. Her pale hair had grown longer, and she'd taken to wearing the bright clothes that the local children preferred, a far cry from the sterile white of her laboratory origins. "Dad!" Echo called, using the word that still made Jake's heart skip a beat every time he heard it. "Look what Melissa taught me." She demonstrated a cartwheel that was perfect in execution, but somehow entirely natural, lacking the deadly precision that had once marked all her movements. Jake applauded, and Echo beamed with the simple joy of a child who'd learned to play. "Very impressive," Jake called back. "But don't forget, school starts in an hour." Echo's expression shifted to the exaggerated disappointment that seemed to be universal among 12-year-olds regardless of their origins. "Do I have to go? I already know everything in the curriculum databases." "Education isn't just about facts, kiddo. It's about learning to be around other people, making friends, figuring out who you want to be." Echo considered this with the seriousness she brought to all new concepts. "Will the other children accept me if they knew what I really am?" It was a question that came up regularly, despite the months of normal life they'd built together. Jake walked down from the porch and knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his scarred ones. "Echo, listen to me. What you really are is my daughter. You're a kid who loves music and hates vegetables and stays up too late reading adventure stories. You're someone who helps old Mrs. Chen with her groceries and who cried when we found that injured bird last month. That's who you really are. But the abilities they gave me are part of you, not all of you. You use them to help people now, remember? Like when you caught little Tommy before he fell from that tree. Or when you sensed the storm coming in time to warn the farming community." Echo nodded slowly. Over the months, she'd learned to see her enhanced reflexes and heightened senses as tools for protection rather than destruction. The local sheriff, a gruff ex-military woman named Kate Rodriguez, had even started consulting with Echo on search and rescue operations, though she believed the girl was simply unusually intuitive rather than genetically enhanced. "Jake Morrison, you get that girl to school before she's late again." The voice belonged to their neighbor, Elena Santos, a middle-aged teacher who'd taken Echo under her wing with the fierce protectiveness that frontier communities showed toward their children. "We're coming, Elena," Jake called back, then turned to Echo with a grin. "Come on, kiddo. Time to go learn how to be a normal human being." "Is that what I am now?" Echo asked as they walked toward the small schoolhouse that served Cedar Falls' population of 300 souls. "Normal?" Jake considered the question seriously. Normal was relative when you lived on a frontier world where everyone had secrets, and most residents were running from something in their past. Normal was the ex-corporate spy who ran the general store, the former pirate who taught mechanical engineering at the technical school, and the retired assassin who baked the best cookies in 3 sectors. "You're exactly as normal as anyone else in this town," Jake said finally. "Which is to say, completely unique and perfectly where you belong." The schoolhouse buzzed with the cheerful chaos of children arriving for another day of learning. Echo's friends, and Jake still marveled that she had friends, real friends who genuinely cared about her, waved her over to their group. There was Melissa Chen, the mayor's granddaughter who taught Echo about friendship. Tommy Rodriguez, the sheriff's son who looked up to Echo like a big sister, and half a dozen other children who saw her as nothing more than the new girl who was really good at sports and helped with their homework. "See you after school, Dad," Echo said, giving Jake a quick hug before joining her classmates. Jake watched her disappear into the schoolhouse, his heart full of pride and wonder. The bioweapon created by a long-dead empire had become a frontier, schoolgirl who argued about bedtimes and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. "She's doing well," a familiar voice said behind him. Jake turned to see Sheriff Rodriguez approaching, her weathered face creased with the small smile she reserved for discussing Echo. "Better than well," Jake replied. "She's thriving. Kids do. That when they're loved," Rodriguez observed. "You did good, Morrison. Taking her in, giving her a real life. Not many people would have made that choice." Jake thought about the files still hidden in his ship's encrypted storage, the records of Echo's origins, the classified documents that proved she was far more than she appeared. Someday she might need to know the full truth about her creation. But for now she was simply Echo Morrison, beloved daughter and promising student. She made the choice first, Jake said, to trust, to hope, to be more than what she was made to be. I just provided the opportunity. That evening, Jake found Echo on their porch, lying on her back and staring up at the stars. It was a habit she'd developed, this nightly communion with the cosmos. He joined her, settling into the chair he'd built from salvaged ship components. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was thinking about the Vorth Empire." Echo replied, her voice thoughtful rather than troubled. "The species that created me. They're extinct now, but their technology lives on in me. Sometimes I wonder what they would think about what I've become." Jake considered his words carefully. "What do you think they'd think?" "I think they'd be confused," Echo said with a small laugh. "They designed me to be a perfect weapon, and instead I want to heal animals and grow gardens and learn how to bake cookies like Mrs. Patterson. Maybe that's exactly what they would have wanted," Jake suggested. "Maybe they created you not to continue their legacy of war, but to prove that their species was capable of something better." Echo turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do you really think so?" "I think that extinct or not, they live on in you. And you get to decide what that means. You can be the weapon they designed, or you can be the daughter who helps her old man fix the atmospheric processor and argues about whether mint chocolate chip is better than vanilla." "It is better," Echo said firmly. "Vanilla is boring." Jake laughed and Echo giggled, a sound that never failed to fill his heart with joy. Above them, the stars of Haven's world wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small miracle of a genetically engineered weapon who'd learned to love ice cream and bedtime stories. "Dad?" Echo said as they prepared to go inside. "Yeah, kiddo. Thank you. For choosing me, for protecting me, for teaching me that I could be more than what I was made to be." Jake pulled his daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood that had replaced the sterile smell of laboratories and containment pods. "Echo," he said softly, "you were never just what you were made to be. You were always exactly who you chose to become. I just gave you the space to figure that out." As they walked into their house together, father and daughter, veteran and former weapon, two souls who'd found family in the most unlikely circumstances, the stars of Haven's world continued their eternal dance, and in a small frontier town called Cedar Falls, a miracle disguised as a perfectly normal family settled in for another night of the peaceful life they'd fought so hard to build. The bioweapon designated Subject 47 was gone forever, replaced by Echo Morrison, beloved daughter, promising student, and living proof that love could triumph over the darkest designs of war. She would grow up to become a veterinarian, just as she'd dreamed, healing the creatures of Haven's world with the same hands that had once been designed for destruction. And Jake Morrison, former colonial marine and freight captain, had found his greatest mission in the simple task of being a father to a girl who'd taught him that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't genetic engineering or military might. It was the choice to see someone not as what they were made to be, but as who they could become.